Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we're excited to be doing this. And I know that given all the political and legal aspects that are concerning international students on our campus right now, I think it'll be a good discussion to think about how is it that we can help and support inclusion and success for international students. Dina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Dina Neese. I'm an assistant professor at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois. And, one of my research areas of interest for research are student access and success in higher education, multicultural issues and assessment. And the piece that I know that I'll be presenting on is talking about the campus environment. So I'll be using environmental theory from Strange and Branning for us to not only talk about some things, but also promote some discussion on these topics.
Great, thanks. Everyone, my name is David Wynn. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of North Dakota. My area of teaching and research is in regards to higher education law and policy and how it impacts policy and practices when it comes to underrepresented students. And one of those population of students that I study is international students. We're gonna, I know, Bill, you said we have some time to do introductions. I think it might be worthwhile to see who's all joining us, and if people would be able to maybe do a brief introduction, where they are, who they are, and what they do. Who wants to start?
One way I might be able to manage that a little bit is just by the list of who I see as a participants. Maybe I'll just ask as we go down that list for folks to introduce themselves, and so we have some type of order, maybe. So
sounds good, Bill.
On that list, I see Amy is the first person on my list.
Good morning, everyone. I am an assistant professor here at Indiana State in Terre Haute, Indiana. So thank you all for having this wonderful conference today.
Thanks, Amy. Edie?
Hi, I'm Vivian Felix. I'm the Associate Director of Experiential Learning at New York University and the Feinhardt School of Education.
Thank you. Justin? Justin there? No? I see someone indicated as Pierce College. No. And then I see a couple of phone numbers, and I don't know if these are people who are already on, but there's a 626-802-0787.
Hi, good morning. My name is Hyacinth Kuba. I'm a graduate student of College Counseling and Student Services at California State University, Northridge.
Great. Welcome. And then another phone number I see is 206-450-9288.
Yeah, hi guys. This is Luke Williams. I teach for Central Washington University in our IT management program. I'm in the Seattle area.
Wonderful. Great. Glad to have you join us.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Bill. I think that was helpful just to see where everybody's at, and thanks for joining us. We'll go ahead and get started. I know that Dina has a class that starts at 11, and I'm sure we have a schedule. So we'll try to be done with this maybe around at least Central Time, 10:55 or so at least, so Dina's not late to class. This is what we're going to do today is kind of just, let me see if I can move this, is think about who our international student population is, think about some research that's on international students, and this is kind of where we look forward to getting your experiences on your various campuses in regards to the experiences of your international students, at least maybe not empirical research, but anecdotally. And then Dina's going to lead us in a discussion in regards to how international students play in the Strange and Banning framework, and we'll end up with a little discussion. So look forward to that. So thinking about international students, the U.S. is a leading destination with 26% of international students choosing to come to the United States. Throwing it out there, U.S. is by far the leading destination. Does anybody else know what the top next 4 destinations may be under the OECD report? Does anybody have a clue? Anybody want to guess?
Canada?
Okay. Anybody else?
England.
England. All right. So let's say the UK. So the UK is on the top there with 15%. France, Germany, and Australia there come thereafter. But as you can see, with US being the 26th, we are by far the leading destination of international students around the world. Does anybody know how many international students we have in the United States as of the 2016 Open Doors report? Anybody want to throw out a figure?
$50,000.
50,000. All right, Bill. Anyone else? Quick guess, quick guess. Oh, let's see, I think we have a chat here. 500,000, okay. Actually, we have over 1 million students, and actually last year was the first year that we had hit over 1 million students. In 2015, it was over 900 and some thousand students, and didn't quite hit the 1 million mark. And before then, it was 870 some thousand students. And so we now just hit 1 million international students. Now, this number includes not only folks that are studying on four-year institution, it also includes international students studying at community colleges, it includes vocational training, it also includes English language students that are here to study just for English language. So it's very encompassing in regards to the variety of different international students that are here in the United States. And we see over 1 million students. We also know, based on the U.S. Department of Commerce, that our international students make a huge impact in regards to our economy, and that they're contributing in 2014 $27 billion to our federal, local, and state economies. So it's a huge amount, and it's a huge student population that in our presentation today, we make an argument that our institutions should be paying much more attention to. These are the top 10 countries that our international students are coming from. As you guys can see, number one by far is China, India, and then thereafter we have the next top eight countries. Any of these come as a surprise to anybody? I think it's interesting to see that we have our BRIC most of our BRIC countries in there, but we can see by far we have our China and Indian students that are predominantly here in the United States. All right, so to think about the exponential growth that we've had with international students, those particular implications, we see in our research that there's a lack of readiness from campuses to engage and support our international students. I think if we look at our campuses and we see what's going on around the country, we see a large amount of services that are in regards to compliance, visa compliance issues, making sure that our international students are complying to legal aspects of their stay here in the United States. But the support that we provide on campuses are lacking. And actually, the American Council of Education in 2012 report stated, quote, while efforts to recruit international students are on the rise, the data do not show a commensurate increase in student support services for our international students. I think that's important to note, not only in regards to how is it that our campus environments are being supportive of our students, but then how is it that our institutions are creating an environment and creating services in order to support their stay and their study here in the United States. While we see an increase in fees, these, again, services only address compliance. They're not addressing mental health issues through our counseling services. They're not addressing student involvement, all these other particular aspects of our campus culture, our campus environment that we've created for our domestic students. It's important to also know that while all these services are readily available for our international students, that our international students come from a variety of different cultures, that these services have different particular implications to each of their different cultures and backgrounds. But thinking about the existing literature on international students, it's very new and expanding. A lot of the research that's been done already has been looking at international student challenges when it comes to adjustment issues, academic issues, social and academic isolation, integration in those particular areas. And we see that while there's a burgeoning area of research looking at international student success, what we know out there already is that international students have a variety of different adjustment issues. And I know that Dina and some other folks on the webinar probably have some anecdotal evidence, or at least empirical evidence maybe from your campuses in regards to these particular things. But let me just go through these, and then we'll kind of open it for discussion to discuss the different experiences that international students have on our campus. So most international students, right, have challenges and needs that are psychological, academic, and sociocultural in nature, especially with the transitional aspect of traveling from their home countries to their host countries. And these particular academic challenges come in the form of different instructional styles, the varying faculty-student interactions, and how culture plays a part in those different interactions. And then also group work, the fact that in the United States or in the Western culture, group work may be utilized, but in their particular home culture, group work may not be a large part of their academic education. And when we talk about group work, I have an experience. My wife is also a professor here at University of North Dakota. You know, group work is obviously something that we all utilize in our classes. And she teaches in public health. And she had an experience where there was an international student who just refused to do group work. And I think that it's an illustration of not only the challenging aspects of the transitional aspect of the academic instructional styles, but also I think if we look deeper, it's a response in regards to, unfortunately, the campus culture and the campus environment that we have among our student body that may not have provided an environment that student particularly felt comfortable to do group work with other students in his class. Also, so there are social experiences, cultural experiences, mental health experiences, and the lack of mobility, academic and social integration and isolation, and interaction with domestic students. These are all particular areas that we have looked at for international students and the particular challenges and needs. Opening it up, Dean, I know as we were preparing, you've got some experiences of this. I want to kind of keep this as informal as possible. And I've got some other things on here that I'll mention, but I want to open it up to see how these resonate with your international students on your campus.
I think, and this is Dina, I know when we were talking yesterday too, even academic challenges, and I'll go over this a little bit in the environmental. I was talking with our study abroad and international student office. Sometimes even the terminology and the language we use, for example, general education, if you're talking about general education requirements with an international student, that's not like, even if they're studying for a semester, that's not something that they would know because it's not ingrained in that culture. So we have a very US-centric perspective, and that whole idea of freedom and electives may not be something like that an international student like It's just, it would be completely new. So I think sometimes we think in terms of our names and how we structure, and we tend to be a field of acronyms. Like even those acronyms and naming something and naming things can be are very different. And I think that's something when we put on our lens. So anecdotally, even our campus, we have 400 international students, and our campus wants to grow to have 500. Is thinking even about the physical and the social experiences is not just those experiences on campus, but how are we looking at even our communities where our campuses are situated in, and the access to different types of resources international students will need.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go over that a little bit in the physical, but those are just two anecdotal experiences we have.
Right. Language barrier has been shown to cause academic and social frustration. The fact that I think, like you said, those acronyms or kind of the how we name things or talk about things sometimes has caused academic and social frustration. Anyone else? So I want to mention interaction with domestic students. International students have reported that they seek out, they want interaction with domestic students, and interaction with domestic students is a positive aspect for our international students. I think it's a way not only to attack that language barrier and to learn English as well as the American way of life, but also in those studies it has shown that while interactions with domestic students are positive, our international students are still seeking support from those that understand them the most, which are other peers and folks that come from their particular culture. And I think it's also important that to show how while our international services on campuses are open to our international students, are our particular support services culturally competent, geared to our different international student populations.
David, this is Bill, and I would sort of connecting off of that. And one of the things that I was looking at the list and didn't see, but I know the interactions that I've had with some of our international students and have heard through others who have, is for a number of them, the intense pressure that they feel to be successful here. Mm-hmm. For a number of them, they represent their family and the investment that their family has put into them studying here in the States, and the expectations that they're going to return being very successful, and that they come with a very specific program in mind, and that, you know, here at Michigan State is, and I'm sure it's the same in a number of your all's institutions, is they get admitted to the university, but then they have to get admitted to their college. You know, a great number of our students come to be business majors or engineering majors, and just because they get into the university doesn't mean they're going to get accepted into the college. And the academic pressure that these students feel, you know, we have a number of domestic students who feel that as well, but I've seen that as a really demonstrable element in the experiences of a number of the international students.
Right. And I think we could probably all think about some of these experiences of our international students on campus, for the fact that I think it's no secret that our institutions see international students as cash cows. With the decline in state support for higher education, international students are seen as a student population for our institutions to be able to make up for that loss of funding. And I think we see the admittance and the enrollment of international students who our institutions aren't providing those necessary academic support services to help them be able to succeed, since, as you mentioned, Bill, that they very much prioritize their education by being here. Anyone else? I think mental health is on here. I think, and I think it talks to what Bill was talking about, how the various, the culture shock of coming to the United States, being on a host campus, in addition to prioritizing their education, in addition to the language barrier, the mental health aspect comes out a lot. And I think what we see in research is while international students experience different mental health issues, especially with isolation, loss of identity, anxiety, depression, alienation, those sorts of things. The big question is that while we have counseling services on our campuses, are they being impactful and effective for our international students, especially for those cultures that see mental health as a stigma? Is there a better way that we can be delivering those services so that way we can be attentive to their cultural norms when it comes to mental health issues? That being said, let's go ahead and move on to the implications these have for our international students. And we see that the experiences of our international students are inequitable to our domestic students. This is drawing upon research that I did when it came to leadership experiences and leadership self-efficacy, that we see that our campuses, while many of our different activities and campus engagement programs that we have on campuses, most of them are very domestic student-centered. And we see inequities between our domestic and international students. Not only that, but our international students, right? We clump our international students together as kind of a big group, but it's very heterogeneous, not only based on language competency, if they come from English language countries, speaking countries, but then also based on culture, based on ethnic and racial groups. And so it's important to understand that while we clump our international students together because of their immigration status in the United States, within that particular group is very heterogeneous, and that we should think about the varying different groups that we have within that particular population. And I think this leads us into Dina's presentation that our campus environments and programs are very domestic student-centered. And how is it that we can take those programs and services to then cater to our varying different groups of international students that we have on campus?
All right, thanks, David. So for campus environments, one of the courses that I teach every spring semester is a course on collegiate environments. And the book I've used has been Strange and Banning's book. I know it came out first in Educating for Success. It came out in 2001 first, and then there was an updated edition in 2015. So I'm just going to go over the 4 perspectives of environmental theory and then give a couple of examples in terms of how this would apply to international students. And then we'll open it up for discussion, questions, or thoughts. So the first one is the physical environment, and that's really looking at the way we structure space on campus, such as grounds, sidewalks, and buildings. And there are 2 theorists in this area, Moose and Michelson. And when I think of physical environment, and I was talking, again, these are just conversations that I have, the whole idea of residential campuses and residence halls is something very different for international students, because when we talk about students' residence halls and meal plans, most students in other countries, and even our students who have done internships abroad, a lot of the living environment and spaces are largely off campus, not a residential living environment. So that is structured very differently. The other thing is looking at locations and accessibility with the physical environment, not just of the campus, but what's surrounding it. For example, Eastern I would consider is in a very rural area. So if students are looking to get food specific to their culture, are there shuttles or things or services that are taking them to be able to get that? Because a lot of our off-campus stores don't carry foods that would be, if a student is has a specific type of diet, is looking at having certain foods from their culture here, they're not around, or just being able to have access to go off campus for things. I think those are things to think of. And sometimes when we think about the campus, especially if the goal is bringing in more international students, how are we not only readying our campus physically, but also communicating with, whether it's the various campus community, the Chamber of Commerce, to be advocates for students. Also with the human aggregate, one of the things that students is its environments are different by the people within them, looking at people's behavior, their actions, and their beliefs. When you look at the human aggregate, a lot of our resources are very tailored to domestic students, and they're very specific. For example, sometimes involvement in clubs and activities is something that's very U.S. culture specific, which may not, when we say get involved, for an international student, have we ever considered to think, well, what does that mean in terms of the human aggregate environment and other items there? And then the other thing is, when David had mentioned too, we tend to have international students living together. Are there ways to create human aggregate experiences, whether it's a culture or a learning partner program, whether it's on campus or off, so there is the interaction with domestic students? Because the tendency tends to be, okay, we're focused so much on compliance and getting students here and then getting them through their orientation, which I know students here said sometimes it feels like you're having a lot thrown at you at once, but there's nothing that exists after that in terms of support. And then when I think for the next slide about the organization and kind of the structural environment, environments are different by virtue of their organizational characteristics, and it transcends the people within them, and it's related to the goals and purpose. So if we look at reporting structures and organizational hierarchies, one of the things I keep thinking about too is even just meal plans or meal times. Are they convenient for international students? Are they taking into account Ramadan or other religious holidays that are specific to other cultures? And also sometimes the food, even though campus dining centers can accommodate food, some may not be able to accommodate different requests. So thinking about those, looking at organization and structures, like are there places, like for example, for prayer or prayer spaces, are different cultures even respected? Do different professors on campus honor if an individual needs to miss for a religious reason? And then the other thing, organization and structural and also policy wise, I know per like international student visas, I think during the academic year, it's maybe up to at least 20 hours per week on campus, but international students can work full-time, 40 hours per week during the summer. And that's also a time of the year when there may be not a lot of employment opportunities existing on campus, you know, for students to be able to reach 40 hours when many international students do want to work. I think also the other thing is culture specific. I remember going to several different panel discussions on campus, and even, I think this is also perceptual and even can fit into human aggregate, is there was one student who was from Ghana. He said, out of respect, and even in other cultures, they may not look someone directly in the eye, whereas in our culture, that would be a sign of disrespect not to, taking into account cultural norms and being aware of those as well. The other thing, even for the constructed and the perceptual environment, is just the subjective perceptions of the people within them. And it really goes with the individual's perceptions. I think one of the things, and Bill, that you had brought this up, the pressure to be successful. And I think this is, you know, in difference to like just whether I would say even different cultures, for international students, there's a collectivist and maybe not so much in an individual mindset. For example, if I'm doing something, I'm doing it for the betterment of my family, or I'm doing it for the betterment to bring it back to my home country. I have one student who is in my collegiate environments class, and he wanted to take it because he's getting his master's in kinesiology, and his goal is to create student support services for athletes back in his home country of China. So there is that sense of wanting to do something and be successful, but I'm doing it not just because I want to advance my own individual game. So sometimes when individuals are counseling students or looking at, well, you need to look out for yourself, that's not going to be something that culturally an international student could be able to, it's the mindset and the perception is different. The other thing I would say too is just even our structure on when we talk about social and academic integration, and just that whole idea of separating from or a breakaway from one's culture is something that is really not, it could be more interdependent. So our stress on being independence even and the US culture is something that may not fit with cultural norms, and that perception and being able to talk through that is going to be very important. So at that point, I think if anybody else wanted to share experiences or examples, we could definitely go from there. So how do international students experience higher education in the US, and how can we foster inclusion and success for international students? So looking at, what do we need to do? What environments do we need? Not only environments we need to create, but also what resources do we need to provide? Because I think the other thing is too, even just considering our current context, I know that I actually took a class in the fall semester, and I was talking with an international student, just considering the political environment as well, is the effect of the ban, and also the sense of how students feel welcomed, not only on campus, but in, within the country or within the surrounding community, is something to look at.
One of the, this is Bill. In terms of this question about how can we foster inclusion and success for international students, Michigan State is a very large university. We have a significant number of international students. I think we're between 8,000 and 9,000 students, international students currently. One of the things that I've seen implemented here that I think is really a great program is that we conduct a program for landlords, because you mentioned earlier about the experiences off campus, and what is that off-campus space like in addition to our on-campus spaces, is how can landlords be helpful in communicating in this cultural transitions if they haven't been used to working with international students, in addition just to language barriers, but cultural differences about how students' living environments are, what they're used to or what they expect in a living environment. And that's been well received by landlords, and they find it to be really useful as they try to again contract and enter into lease agreements with students, and try to maybe even cater to international students who are coming to study here.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Bill, how institutions are being proactive about actually I guess, addressing these particular issues before they come up. And I know that at Indiana University, my alma mater, they now have an international student liaison on their campus cadet program, in order to make sure, that there's education and there is a proactive reaching out to international students in regards to, and I guess within the police department, right? I see these proactive ways of trying to attack some of these issues before they arise. Anyone else? Any other experiences from your campus in regards to, or your thoughts in regards to how international students may be experiencing U.S. higher education, or how they can, or how we as professionals can foster inclusion and success? Dina, I know you spoke yesterday when we met informally. Was it your Muslim students? They don't have a prayer space on your campus, and they have to travel an hour away just to have a prayer space? Is that right?
They have a prayer space on campus, but in terms of if they were looking at any places of worship, it would be traveling an hour away. So how are we reaching out even to other resources, considering we're pretty, our closest, probably between Terre Haute, Indiana, or Urbana-Champaign, which is an hour north, they're having to travel. So I think some places, I think the only thing with the prayer space, it's not convenient, on campus. I think it is more out, it's in the multicultural house, which is, in terms of the location physically, is located a little bit further off campus versus being maybe in a student union where where there would be more traffic or more of a chance for students to be able to access that. So I think that's something even to consider. And then the other thing is, even when we're looking at, the reaching out to others and including, student representation on committees, but also looking at reaching out to international student staff and faculty, and being able, I don't know if sometimes campuses are as intentional of looking at, who is on their own campus and how can we create those avenues of support.
I've been a huge proponent when it comes to prayer space or meditation space, is that each building should have, a dedicated room. I mean, I think all of our buildings, I would think there's some space to be able to convert. And I think it just takes commitment from the institution to be able to make that happen. That way it makes, I think that would add to your structural, what you were talking about, right? The structural aspect of a positive campus environment, to have an institution be that dedicated that every building would have some sort of prayer space dedicated to, meditation or, or prayer or whatever it is, open to their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
Tied with that, and the point that you all made earlier, and David, I think you made it, and it's a concern that I've had as I've watched institutions, and David, you got this, is it's the international enrollment in a lot of areas is for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, a money grab. And the decisions about increasing international student enrollment and the pace at which institutions hope to do that is really disconcerting to me, and becomes to me around this notion of ethical responsibility and ethics of care, and I'd be interested to hear from others on the conversation of from what your experience is on your campuses, or what you've seen maybe from where your students have gone, is how much of a central presence has the student affairs professionals in their campuses, or in your experience, has been in those decision-making processes about increasing international student enrollment at their institutions? Because that's what I've seen in the situations, has been the student affairs folks will get a voice once the decision has already been made. It's an academic decision, an enrollment decision about, we're going to increase enrollment. At Dina, you said the goal is to get another 100 international students. Even on small campuses, and my experiences have been with small privates, even moving from, we have 10 international students, our goal is to get 100. You're talking exponential growth in a space. And again, David, as you said, it's not a homogeneous group, it's a heterogeneous group. And so we can't just lump them in, and about the nature of what needs to be ready and available. So that's just one of my biggest concerns here, is that it's the ethic of care that is associated with this very economic driven kind of decision.
Yeah, I'll add on to that, Bill, too, is there's a drive, right, to enroll and to increase our numbers of international students on campus. And then when our student affairs professionals do get to the table and say, hey, we want to do this and we want to do that in order to support our international students, the funding just doesn't really ever match up to those particular needs and resources. So I think it puts our student affairs divisions or professionals, or even other professionals on campus, academic support, at a challenge when we're trying to address these particular needs on campus, but we don't have the resources in order to match those needs.
Yes.
Hi, this is Vivian Felix. I think when we talk about resources on campus, one part that's often left out of the conversation is the impact on library services and those staff. I think a lot of times the economic decision come down to grow the international student body. It's not discussed with library staff. When we think about the education that happens around what academic integrity looks like in a U.S. context, or even specializing in the services about what the library can offer and how to use the resources here, there's an assumption that libraries are the same across different countries, which is certainly not true. And I think oftentimes those staff members feel caught off guard, because often when they'll have those orientations, it'll be the first time they'll realize how diverse that population will really be. Secondly, there's also this assumption about what English language proficiency is, and passing the TOEFL or TEFL does not necessarily mean that you're up to the level that's expected at a graduate or even undergraduate education. So I think that's often a challenge. It's not thought about until literally that first day of the semester.
Great point, Vivian. You know, I think there's this other expectation of our international students that that we take the same approach as our domestic students. These are the services, right? These are the things that we have. Go utilize them or ask a librarian. But you know, our domestic students, at least, you know, they've had a library, you know, in their K-12 elementary, high schools. They've been trained to think about how to use a library. But you're absolutely right. You know, many of our students don't come from a culture or society that uses a library similarly the way we do. And I remember going back to before I went into the academia here in the United States. I was teaching in Vietnam, and plagiarism is a problem, and it's an issue because the use of a library is just not a commonplace like we have in the United States. So Bill posed the question, let's see, yeah. Anyone else? Going off of the library, so go ahead, please.
Sure, David. I'd just like to chime in. So again, I'm at Indiana State, and we have about 18% of our student population from other countries. And with a high majority of them being from Middle Eastern countries. And so the ban obviously has had a significant impact on our student population. In addition to, you mentioned the plagiarism discussion, that's been an ongoing challenge for Indiana State, particularly in certain disciplines. And while education is not one of those disciplines that really struggles with that, we did identify the need to have a prayer space because actually as of last year, Indiana State did not have a prayer space for our students. And so although it's more of kind of a student affairs aspect, our college actually determined it was a great enough need to commit some space in our own building to have that and to really start that conversation and to kind of be the the champion of that. And that has been so well received that room is almost overly inundated, which is a great thing. We're trying to kind of record that to show the real, the necessity of it. So those are just some small things in terms of championing our students versus, yes, we know we have some challenges with plagiarism, and yes, we know that there's challenges in the res hall, but what can we do? And I think the very small kind of olive branch to that student population that we've made has really been very well received, and it shows that we care. Let's have those conversations and let's reach out.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, for sharing that.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. The other thing I keep thinking of, and this is something I have to challenge myself into, and David, this goes back to our top 10 countries of origin, and my colleague and I have had this. We have like China, India, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Canada. Is when we look at that too, even when we're offering like study abroad experiences, or even when we're looking at our curriculum in the classroom, thinking about student services, how much are we taking into account, or do we offer experiences in those countries? Because I know even I was asking even our individuals at EIU what tends to be like for our international students, where are some of the top countries they're coming from, and it was India, China, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Africa, specifically Nigeria and Ghana. So even when we talk about doing study tours or even offering other abroad experiences, I keep thinking, how can we challenge ourselves to really look at, what are our international student population in the United States on our campuses, and what's a way to even intentionally influence either in our curriculums, what we present, what we have as study abroad opportunities, how can we promote students going to India, China, Saudi Arabia, or other countries as well? Versus what we keep thinking of. Like, I've heard of a lot of our students study abroad in the UK and Ireland and Scotland, France, Spain, but how do we also influence, you know, I keep on thinking, how do we take into account our student population on our individual campuses as well?
Well, Dina, I think your comment speaks to certainly, again, the sort of we're a westernized approach to this, and the countries you listed off that are traditionally our study abroad programs are our classic languages from the Western perspective, right? And so you can see that we've entered into this space. American higher education has entered into this space often, as we said, about from an economic driver, you know, as a revenue stream, without really having engaged in any type of reflection on what does this mean about who we are and how we think about higher education. And so it's an exciting time, and it's really potentially a transformative time for us if we're open to that. And I think asking critical questions like those that you're asking, Dina, and the challenge for us, I think on the academic side, is at times in helping our students as we prepare future leaders in higher ed, is helping them ask those types of questions and think about where are we going. They're not popular questions, you got to be careful, but how are we doing this, and how can we use this as an opportunity to maybe transform how we think about higher education and what it means, and the opportunities and experiences that we're providing for all of our students.
That's a great point, Bill. I think, you know, this hopefully this is what, you know, this webinar will kind of get us to think about is, where do we go next? And especially with all the varying things that are kind of going on outside of campus that we really can't control. I know that we've been reading and hearing about, unfortunately, experiences of microaggressions or racist incidents that are impacting, you know, not only our minoritized students, but obviously our international students. And I think I saw something on the Chronicle that our numbers of international students have decreased. I think it's troubling for the fact that we have students that see our American, either the country or our campuses as not a friendly, welcoming place to be. And I think it's as academics, we want to think about how is it that we can help change that. I know. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add, also as an international student myself, I wanted to add upon what was just shared regarding microaggressions and how this is experienced by the international student population. As part of that population holding an F1 visa, I've noted that staff and faculty alike sometimes treat the population very differently. I'm doing microaggressions towards my students because the students perceive that, hey, I'm being treated differently. Now, what worked for me when I came into the country was having somebody who cares and respects me as a person. I had a mentor. This person was actually my academic counselor as part of the international student office. When I came in at a community college as an international student, this person was there for me constantly, asking me those critical questions. What is it that you want? What is it that you need? How can I help you as a person? And I had an opportunity to blossom as a student, and which is what drives me now to the population, and hoping to do it with on what they went through to come here to the United States, and how you can.
I think that's a very great point. And I'm assuming, please correct me if I'm wrong, the way we address, the way we talk, especially, whether we're slowing our language down because we assume that international students can't understand us. I think it's a great point that by treating our international students differently, it is a 11. We went or through our
Oh, no final words. Hope it was informative. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.